Hi, and welcome to the Child and Family Development Podcast. I'm Gretchen Hunter, your host and licensed psychologist, and I have a wonderful colleague here with me today. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Emily Messer, speech language pathologist, and you want to share what we're going to talk about today?
Yes. We're going to talk about something that many families and teachers and clinicians encounter, but it's hard to understand. And the technical term is social pragmatic communication. And so, what it is that kids who have plenty of words or a great vocabulary, but they really struggle to put that into practice to navigate their social world in a high level. So, but I will turn it over to Emily. So, Emily, what is social pragmatic communication?
So imagine two different children on a playground. One child may know thousands of words, speaks in complete sentences, and can explain exactly how dinosaurs became extinct to you. The other
I
child,
know some kids like that.
just a few. The other child may actually have a smaller vocabulary, but when it comes time to join a game, take turns in conversation, notice another person's feelings, or understand a joke, the second child with a smaller vocabulary might actually navigate the social situation much more easily. Why? Because communication is about more than just the vocabulary and the grammar and the foundational skills. It's about knowing how language works in social situations, which is some higher order level thinking that we're looking at in some of our kids. These skills include taking turns in conversation, being able to stay on topic, reading social cues, reading the room, how are other people feeling, understanding those people's perspectives, what they bring to the table that day during that instance, knowing how that can change, adjusting the language for different listeners, for children versus our brother versus our mom and other adults, recognizing humor, sarcasm, figures of speech, figurative language. Another big one is repairing misunderstandings when communication breakdowns occur, which happen with all of us every single day. Um, Together, these abilities fall under what's often called social communication, or in our world, pragmatic language. Some children and adults have difficulties in these areas. These challenges may occur in people with a specific social pragmatic communication disorder, which would be identified by us as a speech language pathologist, those on the autism spectrum, those with ADHD, other developmental language disorders, traumatic brain injuries, or other brain infarcts. But an important note is that you don't have to have one of these standard diagnoses in order to benefit from improvement in your social pragmatic skills. And the big question researchers have been asking is, can these be skills that are taught and improved through intervention? And increasingly over time, the answer appears to be yes.
Um, and that is so interesting as a psychologist who evaluates a range of conditions in childhood. This is something that many kids struggle with, and it's really it's tough to see them and how a weakness in this area impacts their social world, their ability to, develop and maintain friendships and really their overall functional independence. And so it's so nice to be able to evaluate a child and say, to parents, hey, but I know what can help. We can help your
Mhm.
child grow some skills in that way. And so it's really interesting to pay attention to research on how kids learn and how we help them in therapy. And so, I was really impressed to see just kind of how effective intervention can be when delivered, by a really trained provider, but that working with a speech language pathologist, research indicates, can really target and improve actual measurement on kind of conversation skills, social communication skills, but also parent report, teacher report that they're noticing improvements in their real life environment, which is really the most important thing. How are they able to translate those skills? Um, and the other thing I think it's interesting and want parents to know is that it feels really natural and conversational. It's not like a drilled practice
Mhm.
because that makes it much easier for a kid to learn flexible skills that they can then use in others. It's not about kind of teaching to the test. It's really about broadening their skill base.
Mhm.
So tell us, for speech therapists, what kind of therapy do you find really works best?
It's a great question. So we can go about this in a variety of different ways. We certainly do a lot of this in one-on-one therapy between the speech therapist and the client. We can do small groups or group pairings interventions or larger groups to work on social skills. Some common therapy goals might be being able to navigate varied social interactions, improvement in understanding nonverbal communication skills like body language, like gestures, like what is someone saying when they're not speaking, reliance on people for social information rather than objects for interaction. Some of our clients will definitely be very object oriented instead of people oriented, so we do a lot of structured teaching on that. Identifying and understanding communication breakdowns, including how to respond to those in different ways. Being able to build narrative abilities is something we would do not only in one-on-one instruction, but in group instruction through social skills groups and pairings and such. Learning to monitor listener understanding and increasing awareness of just general social language rules. What is and is not acceptable in conversation? What should my body be doing? Those types of things to remain a part of a group or remain a part of a conversation. And one thing you'd mentioned earlier that I think is important to note is the confidence that comes along with being able to improve these skills. A lot of these kids, I really see lack confidence when they can tell that their communication maybe is not as great as their peers when they have that level of awareness. So
Well, and their insight as they get older, if this is translating to less meaningful friendships, not getting invited places, right? Not being excluded, that really hurts. And
yeah.
so the idea about, saying, hey, these are ways to practice. I have run a lot of social skills groups for teenagers, and it's amazing how much kids want to improve at this. And if you can
Mhm.
kind of give them keys to unlock and understand things that don't come as naturally to them, they usually are really happy to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so, what kinds of therapy? What does therapy look like for the child and the family? What can families expect?
Sure. So, parent involvement, we really have a lot of good evidence that suggests that the parent involvement matters. And this is across everything that we do, but certainly in this area because it is not so rote, it is not so predictable on paper. Programs that actively involve both the child and the parent really show larger effects than those focused just solely on the child. So, a child may attend therapy for an hour with me each week or 30 minutes with me each week, but they communicate with you as the family member every single day. Parents and caregivers provide countless opportunities for practicing coaching, encouragement, reinforcement, correction. This finding reminds us that communication growth is often a team effort. And researchers have also found that factors such as age, the treatment location, intervention format, do not just determine success. It's really comes back to the parent involvement. So the engagement is a big piece as we're teaching engagement and teaching how to read other people. So I do a lot of parent education on how to identify these opportunities, show role play, how do we identify and work on this in our day-to-day life, because that's what's most meaningful and is going to create the best carryover.
That makes so much sense. We got to teach parents how to go and be a therapist all day long, and make
Mhm.
it seem natural and practice
Yeah,
at the smoothie mart and I mean
yeah.
and actual kinds of things. Okay, so how important is peer interaction in all of this?
Yeah, it's crucial, very crucial, because social communication is inherently social, what it says in its name. Children learn many communication habits through their interactions with peers. They learn differently from their peers than they do from their adult partners. And so, a question I get a lot early on is, my child's going to start school. Do you think they'll start to pick up on some of this stuff? Do you think that they'll start to improve these skills? I'm worried with how they're going to interact with their peers. They do so great with me at home, but when I watch them on the playground, this does not seem to be that have the same effect. And it just, the social demands are different. They're varied. They have to communicate differently to get what they want. Their peer may not understand what it is that they're saying, and without the use of these nonverbal cues and pragmatic language support. So they learn how to negotiate in social skills groups and one-on-one intervention, to compromise, to take turns, to interpret reactions, repair misunderstandings. Like I said, we can't learn this through just doing worksheets or working on vocabulary development or speech sound production of certain words, and so on and so forth. And it's really important to note that these can be really hard to detect, right? But they impact a child's ability to make friends and be successful in various areas of life. But it can be subtle and hidden beneath really strong vocabulary skills.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
parents and teachers and other medical providers might wonder why a child is struggling, but can't really put their finger on what are the symptoms. I don't really know what it is that
Mm-hmm.
feels off about this. So,
Well, and I feel like, I mean, that's so important thinking about peers because, adults are more patient and, they'll ask questions in a different way if a kid seems to be, they're an easier communication partner. Kids, right?
mhm.
I mean, they're just running, they're just, and
Yep.
so that's so important to be able to say, we want to practice with a conversation partner, with a therapist where they can develop the skills. But then I always think about, how do we help them generalize it? Like, that's great if they can do it in a social skills group, but can they do it at lunch? Can they do it at soccer practice, at a birthday party? And so the idea of, you know, making sure they feel really confident and comfortable with the skill, and not embarrassed, so they're a trusting relationship. Make sure the parents know how it's supposed to go so that they can be, kind of coaching and reminding, and then they will feel better about trying it, at lunch or wherever. I think some kids that I see, I think people just assume they're shy, and they're not really seeing, to your point about it can be more subtle, it can be harder to, but they're really having a harder time thinking of what to say, thinking of, kind of how to respond to different situations. So, what would you say in terms of, takeaways for families? What would you like them to know?
Yeah. So if you're a parent, a caregiver, another clinician, um, you should know that social communication matters. This is a very important area to me and many of my team members here at Child and Family Development. They really influence friendships, classroom participation, family relationships, workplace success, quality of life, as we age and get older. And there's growing evidence that these skills can improve through intervention. This helps with conversational competence, overall functional communication. We have good parent reported outcomes, like we discussed earlier, teacher reported outcomes, increase in confidence, and participation in a variety of activities. And collaboration really matters. When speech pathologists like myself, families, educators, and peers can work together, children often have more opportunities to practice communication in meaningful contexts. And when we can collaborate amongst one another, we can identify some of these things earlier on and help really influence the path that a child may take, in building these skills from a very young age.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is such an important topic. I'm really glad that we're able to kind of dial in, because communication is about connection, and want families to be aware of this resource and the idea that help is out there. So thank you so much, everyone, and tune in later.